Everyone is asking the wrong question. They're asking, what is the next Nvidia? But that question assumes something dangerous. That AI wealth will belong to one company, one winner, one stock. But what if that entire idea is already outdated? What if Nvidia was never the destination? It was only the signal. A signal that something much larger has already begun. We are not in a technology cycle anymore. We are inside a wealth redistribution system. And most people can't see it because it doesn't look like a revolution. It looks like normal progress. But underneath, a silent system is forming. And once you understand it, you stop looking for stocks and start seeing something far more powerful. The system. We need to start by clearing a misconception. This isn't about artificial intelligence as a tool anymore. It's about artificial intelligence as an economy. Because every major technological shift in history has followed the same pattern. At first, people focus on the product. Then they focus on the company. But eventually, the real value moves somewhere else entirely. It moves into the system underneath it. In the early internet era, people thought the winners would only be websites. But the real power went to infrastructure. Servers, fiber networks, data centers, cloud platforms. The same pattern is repeating today. But this time, the scale is much larger, much faster, and far more invisible. Artificial intelligence is not one industry. It is a stack of interdependent layers. Each layer depends on the one below it, and each layer extracts value from the one above it. At the foundation of this system is hardware, semiconductors, advanced chips, manufacturing nodes measured in nanometers. This is where companies like Nvidia became important, but not for the reason most people think. Nvidia is not just selling chips. It is selling access to computation itself. And computation is becoming the new oil, not as a metaphor, but as a measurable economic dependency. Because every AI system today requires massive compute power, training models, running inference, processing real-time data. And none of that is optional.
Happening underneath the surface. Demand is no longer driven by consumer preference. It is driven by infrastructure necessity. And that changes everything about how value is created. Now, here is where most people make a mistake. They assume hardware is the end of the story. But hardware is only the beginning. Because once chips are built, they need memory systems to support them. High bandwidth memory, distributed storage, low latency architectures. Without memory, AI collapses. It cannot scale. It cannot think at speed. And once memory is solved, another layer becomes critical. Energy. Not just electricity, but scalable, stable, high-density power systems. Because AI data centers are becoming some of the largest energy consumers in the world. And this is where the system becomes physical, not digital. Physical. Steel, cooling systems, power grids, substations, land acquisition.
This is no longer just technology. It is industrial expansion. And yet, we are still not at the top of the system.
Because even if you build the infrastructure, you still need distribution. And distribution is where AI leaves the data center and enters everyday life. Phones, cars, medical systems, defense systems, home devices. Every object becomes a node. Every device becomes a terminal of intelligence. And that leads to the real realization. AI is not centralized. It is becoming embedded. Everywhere. And when something becomes everywhere, it stops being a product. It becomes a system. And systems do something very important in economics. They redistribute value. Quietly. Automatically. At scale. Now we go deeper into what most people completely miss. Because once a system becomes this large, the winners are no longer obvious. They are distributed across layers that most investors never directly see. At the surface, people still look for one name, one stock, one breakthrough company. But in reality, AI does not reward a single winner. It rewards entire supply chains. And this is where the first hidden truth appears. Every major AI breakthrough depends on hundreds of invisible contributors. Not just chip designers, but tool makers, equipment manufacturers, material suppliers, software infrastructure teams. Each one is essential, but almost none of them become famous. Because fame in technology does not equal value. Infrastructure equals value. Quiet infrastructure. Invisible infrastructure. Now, let's go back to chips for a moment. Because chips are only the starting point of dependency.
To build advanced semiconductors, you need extreme precision manufacturing. Machines that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Built by only a handful of companies in the world. And most people have never even heard of them. This creates something unusual. A concentration of control, not in the companies everyone talks about, but in the companies everyone ignores. And that is where the imbalance begins. Because when a system depends on a small number of critical inputs, those inputs gain structural power. Not temporary power. Structural power. Now, let's extend this further. Every AI system must be trained. And training requires data. Massive amounts of it. But raw data is not useful on its own. It must be collected, cleaned, structured, processed. And that creates another entire industry underneath AI, a silent layer of data infrastructure. Then comes something even more important, deployment. Because a model that is trained but not deployed has no economic value. So AI must move into real-world systems, search engines, enterprise software, cloud services, consumer apps. And each deployment creates another dependency layer. Security systems, APIs, latency optimization, model hosting. Which means something important is happening again. AI is not one product being sold. It is thousands of services being rebuilt at once. And when that happens in history, value does not concentrate. It spreads. Across layers, across vendors, across infrastructure providers. But here is the part most people still miss. Spreading value does not mean equal value.
Some layers capture significantly more control than others. And control is the real currency of this system. Not attention, not hype. Control. Because whoever controls bottlenecks controls acceleration.
And in AI, bottlenecks are everywhere. Compute bottlenecks, energy bottlenecks, memory bottlenecks, network bottlenecks. Every bottleneck becomes a leverage point, and every leverage point becomes economically valuable. This is why looking for the next Nvidia is misleading. Because Nvidia is not a destination. It is a moment in a chain. And chains do not end at one link. They extend. They evolve. They multiply. Now we reach the part of the system that most people underestimate. Because every digital revolution eventually collides with a physical limit. And AI has already reached that point. No matter how advanced algorithms become, they cannot escape physics. They require energy, massive amounts of it. Every query, every model response, every training cycle consumes real electricity. And that means AI is no longer just a software story. It is becoming an energy story. Now think about what that actually means. If intelligence becomes widely used, then energy demand scales with intelligence itself. Not linearly, exponentially. And this is where the system begins to tighten. Because energy is not infinitely scalable. It is constrained by infrastructure, by geography, by regulation, by time. Which creates a new kind of competition. Not for software dominance, but for power access. Data centers are already competing for electricity the way tech companies once competed for talent. Except this time, the resource is far more limited. And this introduces a quiet shift in global economics. Because regions with stable, cheap, scalable energy suddenly become AI power hubs, and regions without it fall behind. Not in software, but in capability. Now extend this further. AI systems require cooling, massive industrial cooling systems, water usage, heat management, land expansion, which means entire physical ecosystems are being reshaped, quietly, without headlines. And this is where the illusion breaks. Because people imagine AI as something weightless, something digital, something abstract. But in reality, AI has weight. It has infrastructure. It has cost. It has limits. And those limits create new winners. Not because they built the smartest models, but because they control the systems that keep those models alive. Now let's go deeper. Energy is only one bottleneck. Another one is emerging even faster. Transmission, networks, latency. Because AI is no longer just sitting in data centers. It is being pushed closer to users, to reduce delay, to improve responsiveness, to make intelligence feel instant. And that creates something new. Edge infrastructure, distributed compute, regional AI nodes. Which means intelligence is no longer centralized in one place. It is being fragmented across thousands of points. And every point requires hardware, power, cooling, connectivity. So now we are seeing something important. AI is not scaling like software. It is scaling like civilization infrastructure. And civilization infrastructure always has the same outcome. It rewards those who build foundations, not those who build applications. Because applications can be replaced, foundations cannot. And this is where the system begins to reveal its structure more clearly. A structure built on dependency, layer upon layer, each one supporting the next. And if even one layer breaks, the entire system slows down. Which is why control shifts toward the base layers, not the top, not the visible layer, but the invisible foundation underneath everything.
Now we move into the layer where most people think AI actually exists. The applications, the products, the tools people use every day. But here's the misunderstanding. Applications are not the system. They are the surface of the system. And surfaces are the easiest part to replace. Because once the infrastructure is built, applications become interchangeable. Think about past technological waves. Search engines, social media platforms, mobile apps. At every stage, the user-facing layer looked like the center of value. But over time, value shifted downward, into infrastructure, into platforms, into control systems. And AI is repeating this pattern at a much faster speed. Now intelligence is being embedded everywhere, not as a separate product, but as a feature inside everything. Search is becoming AI-driven. Software is becoming AI-assisted. Customer service is becoming automated. Content creation is becoming model-generated. Which means something subtle is happening. AI is dissolving product boundaries.
And when boundaries disappear, competition changes. Because companies are no longer competing for attention. They are competing for integration. Who gets embedded into workflows? Who gets embedded into operating systems? Who gets embedded into enterprise systems? And once embedding happens, switching becomes expensive. Not financially, structurally. Because entire systems begin to depend on that intelligence layer. Now, here is where the next shift appears. Big tech companies are not just building AI models. They are rebuilding their entire ecosystems around AI. Cloud platforms are expanding compute capacity. Software companies are restructuring products around AI agents. Hardware companies are redesigning devices for on-device intelligence. And every move reinforces the same direction. AI is not a feature anymore. It is becoming the foundation of digital infrastructure. But this also creates tension. Because not every company can control every layer. Some control compute. Some control distribution. Some control data. Some control user access. And this creates a fragmented power structure. Not a single monopoly, but a network of dependencies. And in networks like this, value flows toward bottlenecks again. Always. Now, let's slow this down for a moment, because this is where most viewers lose the bigger picture. The real transformation is not that AI is improving software. It is that AI is reshaping how software itself is built, deployed, and monetized. And that means the entire digital economy is being reconstructed in real time. Quietly, systematically, layer by layer. And while users only see new features, behind the scenes, entire business models are being rewritten. Subscriptions are changing. Advertising is changing.
Enterprise licensing is changing. Automation is changing labor economics. And every one of these changes feeds back into the same system. More compute demand, more infrastructure demand, more energy demand, more distribution demand. It becomes a loop, a self-expanding loop. And loops like this do not stabilize quickly. They accelerate until something forces a limit or a new equilibrium emerges. But we are not there yet. Not even close.
Now we reach the most misunderstood part of this entire system, because by this stage, people assume the winners are already visible. But in reality, we are still early in the value capture phase, and early phases are always deceptive. They make it look like success belongs to the most obvious names, the most talked about companies, the most visible breakthroughs. But systems like this do something different over time. They separate visibility from value. And once that separation happens, most attention goes to the wrong places. Now, let's define what winner actually means in this system. It is not the company with the best product. It is not even the company with the most users. It is the entity that controls constraints. Because in AI, constraints determine scale, and scale determines value. So whoever controls compute access controls how fast intelligence grows. Whoever controls energy supply controls how far it expands. Whoever controls distribution channels controls how widely it spreads. And whoever controls data flow controls how accurately it evolves.
Now look closely. None of these layers belong to one company. They are distributed, fragmented, interdependent. Which means the system does not produce a single winner. It produces clusters of advantage. And those clusters shift over time, depending on bottlenecks, depending on demand, depending on technological breakthroughs. Now here is where it gets even more subtle, because most of the real value is not in the end product. It is in the infrastructure usage behind it. Every AI interaction consumes compute. Every compute cycle consumes energy. Every energy system depends on physical infrastructure. Which means value is continuously flowing downward, toward the base layers. Even when users think they are paying for software, they are actually paying for computation time, infrastructure time, system time. And that is a fundamental shift in economics, because time-based infrastructure scales differently than product-based revenue. Now, let's talk about the invisible winners, the companies that rarely appear in headlines, but sit directly inside the system's bottlenecks. Chip supply chain operators, equipment manufacturers, memory producers, data center infrastructure firms, power system engineers, cooling technology providers, network optimization companies. Each one of these plays a role that is not replaceable in the short term. And because they are not easily replaceable, they gain pricing power. Quietly, gradually, structurally. But here is the key insight. Even these are not permanent winners. Because in evolving systems, bottlenecks shift. What is critical today may become secondary tomorrow. And what seems irrelevant today may become essential in the next phase. Which is why the smartest participants in this system are not predicting winners. They are tracking dependencies. Because dependencies reveal where control is forming. And control is what determines long-term value capture. Not attention. Not popularity. Not short-term performance.
Now, step back for a moment and look at the entire structure we've built so far. Chips, memory, energy, networks, distribution, applications, data. Each layer depends on the others. Each layer amplifies the others. Each layer consumes and produces value at the same time. And this creates something powerful, a self-reinforcing system, one that grows even without centralized control. And systems like this do something important in history. They reshape entire economies without announcing it, without permission, without visibility.
Now we arrive at the final realization. After everything we've broken down, chips, energy, networks, distribution, applications, data, there is one conclusion that becomes unavoidable. This is not a story about technology. It is a story about structure. And structure always decides outcomes. Not ambition, not innovation, structure. Because in systems like this, there is no single winner. There are only positions within a system. Some positions control bottlenecks. Some positions depend on bottlenecks. And some positions sit in between, extracting value from both sides. But none of them exist in isolation. They exist as part of a connected architecture. And that architecture is still being built, even now, in real time. Which leads to the most important question. Not what is the next Nvidia, but something far more fundamental. What is the system still becoming? Because once you understand that this system is not finished, you stop treating it like a finished market. You stop looking for final winners and start recognizing evolving layers. And here is the deeper truth. Every major economic era in history looked like chaos while it was forming. But in hindsight, it always looked like structure. Railroads, electricity, internet, cloud computing. Each one looked like competition at the surface, but underneath, it was system formation. And the same thing is happening again, except this time, the system is thinking. And that changes everything. Because when infrastructure becomes intelligent, it stops being passive. It starts optimizing itself. And when that happens, value no longer stays where people expect it to stay. It moves. It shifts. It concentrates. Then redistributes again. Quietly. Continuously. Automatically. And most people will only notice it after it has already happened. But those who understand the structure early don't chase individual names. They track the architecture. Because architecture is what creates all outcomes. Not predictions, not narratives, not hype. Just structure. And once you see that structure clearly, you cannot unsee it again. The future of wealth is not a stock. It is a system.